Hi and welcome to this comics and lit analysis video for the opening of Act 1 of An Inspector Calls. A quick reminder, this video is a companion to my summary of the opening of Act 1. If you haven't watched that yet, use the link in the information below to watch it now. In this analysis video, we'll be taking a look at some of the key themes Priestley explores through quotations and analysis of writers' methods. Before this, let's consider a few important contextual points to help us analyse the plot with greater clarity. Remember, the play is set during the Edwardian era in 1912, just before the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. But Priestley wrote the play in 1945. It was first performed in 1946. Priestley wanted to use the play to show how society had changed since the two wars, so that people could make better choices going forward. In 1912, Great Britain was an economic and industrial powerhouse. Many people worked in factories which were owned by private businessmen, also known as industrialists. These men became very wealthy off the back of their workers, who often worked in cramped and sometimes dangerous conditions for low pay. Britain had a rigid class system at the time. If you worked in a manual job or a trade, using physical labour, you would be known as working class, existing on lower wages with a basic standard of living. The middle classes were made up of business owners, merchants, and those in higher paying jobs, such as doctors or lawyers. Middle-class families lived in large houses and had the financial freedom to spend money on expensive clothes, furniture, and activities. In social standing, the upper classes were a smaller but more privileged section of society, made up of those in the nobility, with titles such as lord or lady, people whose great wealth and land had been passed down for generations, and many of whom did not have to work at all. As a result of the class system, there was a huge gap between the wealthy and poor in society. However, the working classes had begun to take steps to improve their situation. In 1906, the Labour Party was formed to represent the rights of working class people. Many workers began to take industrial action, going on strike from work to force the business owners to raise their wages. But despite this, most of the wealth was still in the hands of the upper and middle classes, making a working class lifestyle a struggle. In addition, there was no gender equality at the time. Many working class women could find work in textile mills or as household servants, but their wages were much lower than men's. Women from wealthier families could mostly be confined to managing the household and children for a working husband. Women had no right to vote, and few of the freedoms that men enjoyed. It was not unusual for married men to have affairs, while if a woman got pregnant outside of marriage, they would be seen as ruined. There was also no state support for unmarried mothers. Okay, so that covers some of the important context to help us analyse the play in closer detail. I will now explore some of the key moments in the play's opening, connecting them through the themes Priestley highlights. First, let's take a look at the theme of class. Perhaps the first thing to note from the beginning of the play is the Birling family's middle-class status. They are living in heavily comfortable setting, with expensive luxuries such as port and cigars available to them. However, there are interesting nuances to the status of the Birlings. Note how Arthur's language is slightly informal. "Giving us the port, Edna," indicating the provincial speech Priestley instructs in the stage directions. He is being identified as less refined and of lower social status than Mrs. Birling, who repeatedly corrects him in the play. Look at her superior and condescending tone in lines such as, "You're not supposed to say such things," and "Arthur." Mrs. Birling's haughty attitude to Arthur and the other characters is intended to symbolise the attitudes of the upper classes, so there is an innate tension between Arthur and Sybil because of their contrasting backgrounds. Gerald's upper class position is also highlighted by Arthur's seeming need to impress him. Despite Arthur being older, he makes regular references to Gerald and his parents throughout the scene, which implies he is desperate for Gerald's approval, perhaps most notably in Arthur's discussion of receiving a knighthood, which indicates his desire to climb the social ladder and impress others. Now let's consider how the theme of capitalism versus socialism is represented. Priestley quickly identifies Arthur as a capitalist, which is a person who believes that individuals should have independent rights over their business, property, and wealth. Priestley uses repetition, as Arthur twice refers to himself as a hard-headed businessman, indicating Priestley's keenness to identify him to the audience as a capitalist. In several lengthy speeches, Arthur repeatedly claims to be an expert on the state of the country, commenting on the possibility of war with "there isn't a chance of war," and the success of industrialism, referring to the Titanic as unsinkable. Priestley uses this repetition to make Arthur seem overconfident and pompous, traits which would make him unlikable to the audience. Furthermore, since the play is set in 1946, the audience would be well aware that Arthur's predictions are wrong. There had been 2 world wars, and the Titanic did, of course, sink on its maiden voyage in 1912. This creates what is known as dramatic irony, a technique where the characters on stage know less than the audience. Although Arthur seems assured and confident, the audience's knowledge of future events makes him seem unreliable and overconfident, which subtly undermines his capitalist viewpoint. Priestley, as a socialist, deliberately makes Arthur, a stereotypical capitalist businessman, appear that he is not trustworthy. Priestley also has Arthur directly criticize socialist principles in the simile, as if we were all mixed up together like bees in a hive, which implies that humans should not work together for the common good, like worker bees. He emphatically states community and all that nonsense, using a forceful and bitter tone, which, considering the use of dramatic irony earlier in the scene, makes his views less palatable to the audience. Another key theme of the opening is gender. Sheila in particular represents the restrictions on women of the time. Priestley foreshadows the possibility that Gerald has been unfaithful as Sheila questions him on his absence in the previous summer. "When you never came near me, and I wondered what had happened to you." This presents Sheila as somewhat astute. She seems aware that Gerald is hiding something. In a sign of Mrs. Birling conforming to the expectations of the time, she tells her, "Men with important work to do sometimes have to spend nearly all their time and energy on their business. You will have to get used to that, just as I had." But Sheila's response reveals she is perhaps unwilling to fully conform, as her mother has. Sheila responds confidently, "I don't believe I will," half playful, half serious, to Gerald. "So you be careful." Here the use of short sentences indicates her forcefulness, which is tempered by the stage directions, half playful, half serious, revealing that Sheila realizes she cannot fully express her true feelings yet. The final theme we will explore briefly is responsibility. This theme is perhaps best represented through Eric's behaviour in the opening scene. Priestley presents Eric as irresponsible in the scene, first through his outburst of laughter at Sheila and Gerald, where Sheila jokes that he is squiffy or drunk. Later he mocks Sheila instead of offering a sincere compliment when he toasts, "But she's not that bad really, good old Sheila." And there is finally the odd omission of information when he is talking with Arthur and Gerald, eagerly, "Yes, I remember," but he checks himself, which suggests he is anxious and may have something to hide. Eric is characterized as irresponsible in the play's opening, perhaps as a way to indicate the negative impact of privilege on young men in 1912. So, as we wrap up this summary and analysis, you should be starting to build a picture of each of the main characters and how Priestley uses them to criticize the overprivileged in society, with a view to promoting his own socialist ideals. If you enjoyed this video summary and analysis of the opening of An Inspector Calls, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel below.